want to point out a few things. So we have 3 wonderful guest speakers today. So we'll have some people speaking and also some videos to share. But just a reminder, if you brought food in, to recycle and put it away when you head out. And also, please keep your cell phones away and your headphones off, because people traveled a little ways to come be with us today. So the first person I want to introduce is Andy Byrd, and I'm really excited. I've been talking to her a lot on email, and so I get to meet her in person today. And she is a climate activist and filmmaker. So she's going to talk to you a little bit about her work, and then we'll show the video, the film that she created. And featured in the film are a couple of different people who we also have as speakers here. We have Susie Arnold. She's coming to us from the Maine Island Institute. And Heather Foran is from the Resilience Club. And they'll explain a little bit about what their organizations do. But essentially what the mission of today is to share with you people in our community that are working towards protecting our environment, sustaining our environment, and preventing climate change from happening. So that's their work, and they're right in our backyard. So I'm excited to have them here today. So Andy, I will have speak first, and thanks for your attention.
Good morning. I'm really very pleased to be here. I'm glad I made it safely. I live about an hour east of here, and who would have thought April 8th we'd be having a pretty significant snowstorm. So glad you all are here today. For almost 20 years, I've been concerned and I've been educating Mainers across the state about climate change and ocean acidification. But I've also been taking personal action, such as putting up solar panels on my house. Did it in the 1990s before it became such a popular thing to do. But what really excites me today and gives me hope is that young people around the world, like all of you, are changing how we think about global climate change, and they are inspiring my generation to get in gear and do something about it. So perhaps you've heard of Greta Thunberg, a 16-year-old Swedish climate activist. She was recently nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and she decided one day to stop going to school on Fridays. Her point was, why study for a future that I may never have? She wanted to motivate people in her own country, and now she's a celebrity, and students around the world are following her lead. Even here in Maine, heeding her call to strike for climate change, nearly 1,000 students in the Portland area left their schools on Friday, March 15th, and joined together for a rally at City Hall. And perhaps some of you were there. Were some of you there?
Yep.
Anyone?
Raise your hands if you went.
Yeah, great, great. Well, it was a really uplifting experience for me to be there. I believe that stories like Greta's can touch hearts and mobilize action for change. I have witnessed the power of stories in my lifetime, and that's what started me on a journey 3 years ago to start producing films. My first film features the stories of 13 Maine climate justice activists who got out of their comfort zones and took action on climate change. Some of them were even sitting in trees to stop pipelines in Texas. One of the storytellers in that film was elected this fall as Maine's youngest legislator, and I understand she's going to be here to speak next week. She is Chloe Maxman. She's age 26, and she started testifying at the legislature when she was just 12 years old. She was so concerned about the environment. On April 23rd, she will be introducing Maine's Green New Deal. And what is exciting about this plan is that she wants young people involved in it. So there'll be a youth rally on April 23rd, and I hope many of you will hop on a bus and come up and join Chloe and others. You're about to see my new film. This is the first cell of it that captures stories in a different way. There is a saying that I've always liked, that let your life speak, which means live your values and let people see who you are in every day. So I look at rooftop solar, I look at a backyard greenhouse, a commuter on a bicycle, or driving an electric car, and I see a person's story and their commitment to making this world a better place. Last year, I set out to gather those stories from Kittery to Fort Kent and to talk to some of Maine's solutionaries and see what their climate solutions are. Susie Arnold is in the film, so you're going to hear from her in a few minutes. Now, my intention with this film was not to entertain, but I hope it will inspire people that there's already a lot going on. But I'm hoping somebody in this room is going to say, wow, I could make a film like that about South Portland. I could go out and find the solutions that are already happening here and bring that to our elected officials and to my neighbors, etc., and to really to generate more of a movement than is already going on here in South Portland. So anyway, I'd love to talk to anybody who might be interested in doing that, because that's the idea, is to replicate the film. So let's watch the film now.
Thank you, Andy. And I just want to point out that there is no closed captioning, so I apologize on the film right now, but there is on the second one that we have. So.
I see the hopeful signs of the transformation that we can still make. All over Maine, from Kittery to Eastport, from the coast to the mountains, our neighbors are hard at work creating the resilient future they envision. Come with me on a quick tour of Maine and see what's possible.
Welcome to the Boothbay region here in Mid-Coast, Maine. At the southern end of the 15-mile peninsula, everywhere we turn, we can see signs of a sustainable and hopeful energy future. Here, faced with the need to upgrade the transmission line to meet the area's power needs, particularly in summer, Maine policymakers accepted a proposal for a Maine-based company, Grid Solar, to design and implement an alternative without new transmission lines and save all Maine ratepayers significant dollars. Bottom line, new transmission lines would have cost $18 million. The project was $6 million while employing Maine energy businesses to install efficient renewables technology in businesses, municipal structures, and residences throughout the community. And more good news. This sets the stage for the community to become a microgrid, generating and storing all of its required energy, and modeling cost-saving distributed generation alternatives for other Maine communities. The pilot project points the way for Maine to transition quickly to a homegrown, clean energy future that will keep about $5 billion in our economy that today we spend on fossil fuels from away. Across the landscape of Maine, from York to Aroostook County, from Washington to Oxford County, and everywhere in between, Mainers have been making visible the resilient communities we want to wake up in every day. Rooftops are sprouting solar panels for electricity and hot water. Solar farms harvesting sun power are growing up on treeless expanses and landfills. Wind turbines dot a few mountain and island landscapes, but are promising for offshore sites. Architects and contractors are incorporating energy savings into the structures they design and build. Architect Emily Mottram told us how building a home that generates all the energy it needs doesn't have to be complicated or expensive.
I want to find the things that we can do that are really simple and easy that don't cost more money. Like, you can build a net zero house by not putting windows on the north side and facing it south.
Emily and her business partner, Patrice Miller, in consultation with Steve Teal, have put this into practice in a development in Cumberland.
We're able to create virtually as much power as we use.
Partly it's because Patrice is a net zero owner, and just mindful ownership saves a lot of electricity. So that future third row would put this house into the net positive category, allowing it to produce the energy to run an electric car.
Mindfulness in the design process allows Emily, Patrice, and Steve to create space that is more useful and livable.
What we actually do is think about where you're going to be during all the different parts of the day and how you move through the space. And so you can gain a lot more space without needing a lot of square footage.
Building thriving communities in Maine also includes developing local food systems that nutritiously and affordably feed us while enhancing our soils and our fresh and marine waters. Here, we are a national leader.
You know, the future that I see is distributed food production throughout the landscape. That's what it looked like when we started. Just a lawn on a slope. So now, instead of a gently sloping hillside, now I have steps in the landscape of a builder more than a gardener.
Permaculture uses a different paradigm than traditional agriculture.
We're trying to guide the succession of the ecosystem here. We're trying to introduce more food-bearing perennial plants like nut shrubs, berry bushes, and fruit trees. All of these perennial elements, they produce food, they provide ecosystem benefit, wildlife habitat, etc., and they pull a lot more carbon out of the atmosphere.
Jesse also sees potential for the permaculture forest garden model to be adopted by schools.
Once a forest garden is established, there's a lot less maintenance that needs to occur during the summer when kids aren't there.
Maine also has a long tradition of harvesting food from the ocean. New practices may help fishermen continue this tradition in a changing environment.
Well, my hope is that we can demonstrate that growing kelp alongside shellfish makes a difference.
We have the Island Institute, we have Biggle Laboratory for Ocean Sciences, we have an industry partner, we have Oceans Approved. By working with Paul, we're able to get out on a farm and do this research.
Paul Dobbins farms sugar kelp off Chebeague Island. His company, Oceans Approved, buys kelp from 9 other Maine kelp farmers and produces fresh frozen products for restaurants, schools, and universities, smoothie shops, and others.
You know, we don't know what we don't know about seaweed farming. The Chinese have been doing it since before the written record. The Irish have been doing it for 400 years. And in Casco Bay, this is our 8th season. And so there's a lot that we don't know about how a kelp farm interacts with the environment.
Fishermen are thinking about diversifying their businesses away from just lobster because of climate change and ocean acidification. It's a risky business strategy to have all your eggs in one basket. So they've been thinking more about kelp aquaculture, shellfish aquaculture. However, they also are aware of ocean acidification.
Ocean acidification occurs as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is absorbed and turns into carbonic acid in the ocean. This oceanic uptake of CO2 can make it hard for lobsters, oysters, and mussels to develop properly. Shell-forming organisms represent 85% of the value of Maine's fisheries landings. Climate scientists tell us we have 12 years to dramatically reduce our carbon emissions and transition to a clean energy economy that also places value on our forests, soils, and ocean plant life, which absorb excess carbon. This is critical if we are to maintain a planet that can support life. Here in Maine, we are already experiencing a climate future as ticks proliferate and the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than most ocean water around the world. The Northeast region can expect the highest rates of sea level rise and ocean warming in the country, and the largest temperature increase in the lower 48 states. Winters will warm 3 times faster than summers, affecting ski season and maple syrup production. These will impact our physical and mental health. Growing kelp could be part of a solution here in Maine.
Growing kelp takes out more nitrogen, more phosphorus, more CO2, lots of the things that we have too much of in the water.
It's tasty, it's super nutritious, it grows naturally, so we're not introducing any new species to this environment.
If it also increases the health of your shellfish, then it's a really good situation.
Repurposing food to feed humans, animals, and compost bins is ranked as a top solution to address accelerating climate change. Getting around our rural and sparsely populated state presents a challenge. But if you pay attention to what's on the road, you see growing numbers of hybrid vehicles and electric cars, full commuter trains and buses, and more people on bikes, particularly in urban areas. Electric bikes and other alternative vehicles are beginning to be seen around town as well. Electric cars may be futuristic, but they still need mechanics. The Paris Autobarn is already showcasing possible new solutions for local shops.
It's a 40-panel system, and it does supply probably 95% of the power for the shop. We heat the shop and cool the shop with our heat pumps that run off the solar. And then we have our parts washer is a water-based bioremediating parts washer, so it's got bacteria in it. We have customers that when we service their vehicles, if we're doing tires or alignments or something on electric vehicles, we plug them in to top our customers' cars off. Tony, the owner, and Travis, the other employee here, they both have electric vehicles. I don't have one yet, but I'm working on it.
So it's time to accelerate the pace of transition to the clean, renewable future that we know is possible. We have the technology and just need the will to make it so. From bare fields to productive school garden, from empty rooftops to a model energy project, from expensive isolation to clean energy independence, the transition is beginning.
It makes me feel very hopeful that we are waking up to the emergencies that climate change is presenting us with, and we are taking this into our own hands to act boldly and to invest in the future that we want.
Beneath the snowfields at this dairy farm in Farmington, New England's largest solar installation, 77 megawatts on 490 acres, will emerge during 2019, providing the town with $2 million of annual tax revenue. Look around your neighborhood, town, and county for sites that could host solar power, an electric charging station, a community garden or farmer's market? What local and state public policies can expedite the transition? What can you do to bring the vision of the just and sustainable Maine community into reality?
All right, I just wanted to point out a couple things. If you notice over here on the screen to your left, to your left, we have, if you have a question and you'd rather not raise your hand to answer it, you could use that code up there, and there's also some of the tables in front of you, and that way we can ask the questions to the folks here on the panel. You don't feel comfortable raising your hand. And and I also wanted to point out a couple things. She mentioned, Andy mentioned on April 23rd, Miss Flynn and I are taking a bus up to the Augusta State House for Youth Voice Action Day. So if you're interested in coming, please come speak with me. I'm in room 171, or you can email me. And also on Earth Day, which is right when we get back from break, April 22nd, we're going to be having the guest speaker that Andy spoke about, the representative, come and speak that day too. So that will be Last Walk of the Dead. So, all right. So next we have Susie Arnold talking about her her experience with kelp farming at the Island Institute. Did you guys recognize her in the video? She was in her gear, I think.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here for speaking during your Earth Week. It's super cool, and I encourage you to go up to Augusta and talk to the legislators. I wish I had done more of that and had more exposure to that when I was a kid, because it can be really empowering, and I just think it's a great idea and a great experience. It's never too early to start doing that kind of thing. So, as your teacher mentioned, my name is Susie. I'm a marine scientist at the Island Institute. It's a community development organization. We're based up in Rockland. We do all sorts of things. So basically, our mission is to sustain the island and coastal communities of Maine. I don't know if you guys realize, but there's actually 15 island communities off the coast of Maine that have year-round populations. So not just summer folks, but people live there all year round. Some of them have as few as 20 people, but most of them have schoolhouses and school children that attend school all year round. So just wanted to let you know that this organization exists, and we do everything from marine-related programs to education-related programs to sustainable energy-related programming, anything that it takes to keep these island and coastal communities going. So I wanted to start out, before I talk about kelp, I wanted to just explain why a community development organization is interested in kelp farming and why we care about ocean acidification and other climate impacts. And I'll start with a little bit about the lobster fishery. So as you well know, Maine is very economically dependent upon lobstering. This slide just shows you some of the annual landings in terms of dollar value coming into these top towns for lobster landings and the percentage. So for instance, the big circle is Stonington. That's the town in Maine that lands the most lobsters. They bring in $62 million a year just from lobstering. That 17% there, that is showing that 17% of people in that town hold lobster licenses. So just to give you an indication of the dependence of some of these coastal towns on lobstering. But it wasn't always this way. We didn't always have so much of our fisheries dollars coming in from one fishery, and this is a really vulnerable place to be. It's like having all your eggs in one basket. If something happens to the lobster fishery, our coastal communities are going to be really impacted. So if you look at the circle on the left, that pie graph shows back in 1995, the amount of fish coming in, or fish or invertebrates coming in from different fisheries. So as you can see, lobster was just one slice of the pie. You had urchins, you had shrimp, you had groundfish, you had scallops. So fishermen were able to access a number of different fisheries to make their living. The pie chart on the right shows 2015 and how much of basically the pounds coming in from the sea come from lobster. And it is like Andy mentioned in the video, predominantly coming from not just shellfish species, but lobster. So it puts these coastal communities in kind of a precarious place, given that climate change is really impacting lobster fishery. Again, this is just another way to look at it. Andy mentioned that 85% of our marine value coming in was from shell building species. This pie chart shows you that 74% of that is from lobster alone. And then you've got other species, but other important species are soft-shelled clams, scallops, urchins, oysters. All of those things are shell building species. And so when I talk about ocean acidification in a little bit, you can understand that. How many of you guys have had ocean acidification in one of your classes? Some. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit more about it. Andy talked about it in the video, but I'll talk a little bit more about what ocean acidification is and why we care, especially in a state like Maine. So there's been a bunch of studies showing that Maine is highly vulnerable to ocean acidification. And we're highly vulnerable from an economic standpoint because of the slides I just showed you. So we have such high dependence on these shell-building organisms. So ocean acidification impacts shell-building species first, and because of that, we're really susceptible from an economic point of view. We're also susceptible from an environmental point of view. Ocean acidification is more of a problem in cold water. It's more of a problem where you have a lot of fresh water coming in because fresh water is more acidic than salt water. And we also have these cold, fresh currents coming down from Canada. We also have this kind of semi-enclosed shape of the Gulf of Maine, which causes that more acidic water to stay put more so than if, for instance, Cape Cod wasn't there and kind of holding the water in almost like a bathtub. So for a number of different reasons, we should care about ocean acidification, not just from an environmental point of view, but also from an economic point of view. We'll get into this too much, but basically, as I mentioned, cold water absorbs carbon dioxide more readily. Colder, fresher water coming into the Gulf of Maine from Canada has a lower pH. And then we've got all these great freshwater rivers emptying into the Gulf of Maine, but as I mentioned, the freshwater coming into those coming in from those rivers is more acidic. So, and I just talked about the semi-enclosed sheet. So, just to back up a little bit, so as Andy explained in the video, we've got more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The oceans absorb about a quarter to a third of that carbon dioxide, and when the carbon dioxide comes into the ocean, it causes the ocean to be more acidic. So that's the basic gist. So that it causes ocean acidification. We also have something called coastal acidification, and that is really exacerbated by pollution that runs off into the water. So at the Island Institute, we are really interested in helping fishermen, specifically lobstermen, diversify their businesses. We're not suggesting that they should stop lobstering by any means, but we are suggesting that because of the climate impacts that are impacting lobsters, they might want to diversify the way they do their business. So potentially including shellfish or seaweed aquaculture as a complement to lobstering. Additionally, in that we're encouraging them to get into shellfish aquaculture, we're also aware that our waters are becoming increasingly acidic and that acidity is potentially going to impact shellfish going forward. So we want to make sure that we're encouraging fishermen to diversify in a responsible way. They're not going to start growing mussels or oysters and then 10 years down the line the Gulf of Maine is too acidic to allow those species to grow. So what we want to make sure of is that there could be a local remediation strategy for a shellfish farmer. So we're investigating the possibility that farming kelp, as we showed in the video, can actually locally improve water chemistry through photosynthesis, thereby improving the water chemistry for co-located shellfish. So if you have a mussel farm, like there are in Casco Bay, and you have kelp around that mussel farm, can the kelp, through growing, actually improve the water chemistry and allow those mussels to do better? So this is a land forest. We know that land forests photosynthesize, they take carbon dioxide out of the air. You can think about a kelp forest in a similar way in the ocean. So it photosynthesizes, and when it does that, it takes carbon dioxide out of the ocean. and it actually changes the water chemistry. So what we wanted to test, and we are still working on showing, is can a kelp farm actually locally improve water chemistry and improve conditions for co-located mussels? So you guys are aware that there's mussel farms in Casco Bay. Were you aware that there are also kelp farms in Casco Bay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so this is the site that we were working at, and this is the site in the video from the last 3 winters. That star right there, that should be Island, is the island to the right there, and the star is the location of the kelp farm. And this particular kelp farm was an ocean-approved farm site, formerly owned by Paul Dobbins, who was shown in the video. And basically, kelp is a winter crop. So you seed the lines in the fall, sometime around October or November, and it grows up to 12 feet long by May or June when it's harvested. So it complements nicely lobstering. So if you don't want to lobster all throughout the winter, you could maintain your kelp farm. It doesn't take a whole lot of work. Basically, you seed the lines, and then you go out and make sure that the lines are okay every couple weeks or after a storm. And so the footprint of this kelp farm is about 1,000 feet long. So he grows 7 lines that are 1,000 feet long, and each line is separated by about 10 feet. So you can think of the footprint maybe like 100 feet wide and 1,000 feet wide or long. So that rectangle there is the footprint of the kelp farm where I was working at. And the 2 stars on the chart on the right are basically our experimental site where we measured water chemistry right in the middle of the kelp farm, and then our control site where we had the same instruments outside and upstream from the kelp farm. Okay, don't panic.
Some climate activists choose the path of nonviolent direct action, blocking mining, fracking, and drilling operations. Many student activists are engaged in campus-based efforts.
Sorry about that. Well, while we're dealing with the technology, does anyone have any questions right now for Andy or Susie about kelp farming or getting involved with? Oh, no? Has anyone ever eaten kelp before? I have, yeah. So what do you think? Do you like it?
Yes.
Isaiah, yeah? Have you had it before? How about mussels? Who likes to eat mussels, right? Yes. All right, we're back.
Okay, so where I left off, we have instruments. So all this research, as you can see from the snow, takes place in the winter. So to be a kelp farmer, you have to be very hardy. And what I've realized is to be a scientist who studies kelp farming, you also have to be kind of hardy. All my graduate work was on coral reefs, so this was a little bit of a shock to my system to be doing field work in the wintertime, but nonetheless, it is very exciting. It's fun to see that the kelp farm can withstand floating sea ice. So we've been, have these huge, like 10 by 10 glaciers coming up upon our boat in the wintertime, and Paul Dobbins always says, yeah, the ice will go right over the farm, because a kelp farm, you can hardly even see it from the surface because it grows at 7 feet below the surface. And so one of the things that kelp farmers claim is that it doesn't matter if the ice is over, it can really withstand that. And I've witnessed that firsthand, which was kind of exciting. So anyway, so we've got instruments inside and outside of the kelp farm. They measure water quality parameters that you have to get at to understand ocean acidification, and those include the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the water, the pH, the dissolved oxygen, the salinity, the temperature. These things are continuously measured every 30 minutes inside and outside of the kelp farm. I'm not going to dive into the weeds too much, but basically the take home is that in year 1, so this is 4 winters ago, we really wanted to demonstrate the proof of concept. Can growing kelp in the local environment actually change the water chemistry? And what we found was yes. In fact, we can demonstrate through these instruments that you can detect a difference, actually a higher pH inside the kelp farm versus outside the kelp farm. And these are measurements that actually really impact shell building for shellfish species. So in year 2, what we wanted to demonstrate was, okay, we know we can detect a difference in water chemistry inside the kelp farm. Well, how big is that halo, if you can imagine this halo of irradiated water around the kelp farm? How big is it? Is it just within the confines of the kelp farm? Does it extend downstream when the current is going in that direction? And so we actually have shipboard instruments that have, this is the boat basically, and those are all the instruments that measure the water chemistry of the water. That basically we tow the boat in circles around the kelp farm and measure the chemistry of the water as we're going. And we can develop these heat maps of chemistry of the ocean water. And so what you can see from this figure is that to the northeast of the kelp farm, there's higher CO2, and inside of the kelp farm, there's lower CO2. So importantly, this is where the kind of the rubber hits the road, is can shellfish actually benefit from this change in water chemistry? And that's what all of the shellfish farmers want to know. It's great if it improves the chemistry for just the environment, but can actually they benefit from that change. And so in the 3rd year, so last winter, we partnered with Bangs Island Mussels and basically took their mussels from their farm and put them in different locations inside the kelp farm and at varying distances outside the kelp farm. So those blue stars there show you where we outplanted these mussels. Basically, we put the lines of mussels in cages, and for replicates, we put 3 replicates in each, and measured different parameters of the mussels after we harvested them. So we found that the mussels inside the kelp farm actually had denser shells, and they were harder to break. And so that was a really important outcome to share with mussel farmers, is that, okay, if they're seeing, I don't know if you've ever seen mussels harvested from a mussel farm. I should have showed that video. But they're really rough on the mussels. They're like the mussels are coming off the lines in huge piles, and the workers are just shoveling them like you would shovel snow into the processing equipment. And a large fraction of those mussels are actually breaking during that process. So if you can grow a mussel that has a thicker shell that's harder to break, that means more money added to your bottom line. So this year what we're doing is we're working with a new kelp farmer, not in Casco Bay, out at the mouth of the Sheepskirt River, and we got hydrodynamic models from a postdoc at the University of Maine to give us an indication of how the water moves at the mouth of the Sheepskirt, where this kelp farm is. And the reason why we chose this new kelp farm is because it was going to be the biggest kelp farm in Maine. There was going to be 13 lines, each 1,000 feet long, so it would have been a really great site for us to look at a huge kelp farm with high water flow. So if you have all this kelp, but the water is moving a lot faster, can you still detect the difference? Well, unfortunately, what happened in January, we had one of those extraordinarily high tides, and this is the farmer Alex on the right. One of his neighbors had a float that came off its hooks, actually went through his kelp farm and took out about 10 of his lines. So destroyed his business for this winter. Fortunately, our instruments weren't there yet, so they weren't destroyed, but we will be still deploying the instruments there. He reseeded some of his site, so he reseeded in January, so the likelihood that the kelp is going to reach the size that it would have is small, but hopefully it'll still be about 6 feet in length by the time he harvests in June. So that's definitely a hazard of the job, working out on the water. But we'll be testing the concept at this bigger farm this year, and then hopefully next year when he's at full capacity again. So I think I'm just kind of heading up probably in around 10 minutes, and I am going to show you guys a comic that was produced by O-Chang Studios. So where I want to kind of wind down is some of the work that the Island Institute does is thinking of creative ways to share the message of impacts of climate change on fisheries. And I just wanted to share with you, I'm not going to show, we've created 4 short documentaries that are about 5 to 10 minutes long. And we took them along the coast and did showings in many, many, many coastal communities a couple of years ago. And these could be good for you guys. If you're interested in climate impacts on fisheries, they could be interesting for you guys to watch. The first one is on the impacts of the lobster fishery. So part one is warming waters in the Gulf of Maine. Part two is on ocean acidification. I got to travel out to Alaska to film that documentary. We learned a lot from the Alaskan fishermen and how they're tackling ocean acidification out there. They have a pretty high-tech laboratory that does a lot of work on Kodiak Island. So that's where a lot of the footage is taking place. And then part three was an example from another state down in Florida, Apalachicola, where their oyster fishery collapsed. And it's an example, it's actually a hopeful story because it's an example of how that community rebuilt after a collapse of one of their shell building fisheries. And then we wrap it up with the future of shellfish and seaweed aquaculture in Maine, talking a little bit more about mussel and oyster farming as well as kelp farming. And then, so before I show this 3-minute comic, another thing that we're working on at the Island of Sea that has to do with climate change that I think you probably have been exposed to living here in South Portland is sea level rise. And a lot of the island communities are also very vulnerable to sea level rise. And we've held a lot of community conversations around adapting to sea level rise and have thought about different ways to kind of translate complex science to a non-scientific audience. And one thing that one of our employees at the Institute has done is throughout this, she's kind of documented some of the conversations we've had with communities through comics. And in doing that, we thought, it'd be cool to partner with Ochang Studios. Have you guys heard of Ochang Studios at all? Anyone follow their animations? Well, they're very funny. I hope you think so too. And so basically we partnered with them and I helped to write the script for this comic that I'm going to show you. And they took some of the ideas from this woman, Kate Tagati, who I work with, who did some of these comics here, to kind of put some humor into what's a really daunting scientific concept that we're all experiencing on a daily basis, some more than others. But so I've talked now for 10 minutes, I think. So I'm going to show you guys this, and I think I'll take questions at the end after the last speaker.
Where's the screw gun, Mia? Don't show where you left it. Oh, for bringing a practice, Barbara. Hey, you get back here.
Whether or not you follow the science of climate change, it's an undeniable fact that the seas are rising.
We know it's happening. We see it every day.
For 3,000 years, sea levels in Maine were relatively stable. But then, in the 20th century, as more and more greenhouse gases began to accumulate in the atmosphere, the seas began to gradually rise. And in the last 20 years, the pace of sea level rise has accelerated to almost double that of the past century. You see, when we burn coal, oil, and natural gas, excess emissions in the atmosphere act like a heat-trapping blanket. This blanket prevents heat from escaping the Earth's surface, raising the temperature. As the Earth heats up, glaciers and land-based ice sheets begin to melt, releasing trapped water from land into the ocean. And as the oceans warm, they actually expand.
Well, ain't you looking rugged? You been working out? Just warming up, buddy.
Intermediate scenarios for Maine forecast nearly 2 feet of sea level rise in the next 30 years. By 2100, 4 feet, with an extreme scenario of over 11 feet. In many areas of Maine, we already experience high tide flooding that will become more frequent as the seas rise. With the current projections, today's high tide will become tomorrow's low tide. So whether you live in southern Maine, out on the islands,
Now how are we gonna get up island? We're gonna send it.
or down east way,
Ain't it a little early to hitch up the plow, do ya? Well, I'm just plowing up the seaweed guy.
rising oceans threaten to destroy homes and valuable coastal infrastructure, putting working waterfronts at risk, causing flood insurance premiums to skyrocket, lowering property values, and costing communities millions of dollars. That's why we must do everything we can to protect our coast and work together to make our communities more resilient in the face of climate change. Making critical infrastructure more resilient using living shoreline techniques, to preserving and protecting existing wetlands and creating sensible zoning ordinances. Sea level rise is happening, and we've got to be prepared. To find out more, visit www.islandinstitute.org.
Accent in here. So the last speaker we have, Heather, is from the Resiliency Hub. Yes. And she's going to be taught. I'm really excited to have her here. We, as you know, in the courtyard are in the process of building an outdoor classroom and having some food gardens out there, so maybe we can get some help from the Resiliency Hub to do that. Heather's here to talk to us a little bit about that. So let's have a round of applause for Heather.
right. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Heather Ferran. I am a community organizer with the Resilience Hub in Portland, which is an organization that does work with permaculture. I work in Andy's film. You saw the guy with the dude with the kilt. Did anyone see him? Yeah. He's a friend of mine. I work with him. And I know you've heard the term permaculture now a few times in this presentation, and I'll get to defining that in a little bit, but I really wanted to show you, maybe do a little bit more showing you all what permaculture is, not just telling you about it. So I'll get to talking about the details of the Resilience Hub in just a second. Talk amongst yourselves. Awesome. Does anyone know where this is? Any ideas? Not China.
Mexico.
Not Maine.
Mexico.
Close to Mexico. So this is actually an aerial photo of Tikal in Guatemala. I can keep talking. So this is actually an aerial photo of Tikal in Guatemala, and if you take a look around, if you were to walk through this jungle, it is an incredibly dense, vibrant, jungle with thousands and thousands and thousands of plants and animal species all throughout it. And I had the opportunity to be there with a group of students in 2008. And while we were there, while we were there, we were meeting with a bioarchaeologist, so an archaeologist who also works with understanding the plants and animals that are around the archaeological sites that exist. And this bioarchaeologist was walking us through the jungle and pointed out that every single plant and animal in this jungle around Tikal has at least 3 different functions for humans. They've actually gone through and cataloged each of the plants and animals and found, based on historical data and also talking with people who live there now, that there are at least 3 different functions for each plant and animal. So the archaeologist said something to me that really blew my mind. She said, basically, we see things like this and see them as symbols of progress. She said, what if rather than seeing this as the symbol of progress, we were to see this as the symbol of progress? She said basically, basically that, you know, up until those giant temples were built, there was no evidence of civilization, but we know that there were lots of people there because there had to be enough people to build those temples. And so basically those civilizations then were essentially compostable. So she kind of flipped the script and said, what if we were to see the most advanced civilizations as the ones of which there aren't any record, because they were actually completely biodegradable civilizations. So if you think about it, this forest ecosystem around Tikal is actually an encyclopedia of ways to live in a regenerative and abundant way. And actually right now, this ecosystem, as well as the people that have been living in this ecosystem for thousands and thousands of years, have both been deeply exploited as a result of colonization, as a result of an economic system that continuously needs to grow and continuously needs to extract new resources. So to me, I think of climate change as a symptom of the way that those systems have become really deeply imbalanced. So when I think of making change, making social change, this is a model that has been really helpful to me. It's from a group called Spirit in Action, which is in New York City. And it basically says that in order to change things, we need people working in different areas. So we need people who are doing reform work. They're working within the current system. So things like policy, like the Green New Deal, changing laws, that would be reform work. We need people who are doing resist work. So Andy was talking about people who are doing tree sits and fighting pipelines. Or I know that some of you all were part of a student walkout around climate change. Those are examples of resisting what's happening in the current system, saying we're not going to do that anymore. And we also need people who are reimagining new systems, who are thinking not just about what we're fighting, but actually what are we building that's going to take the place of that old system. And then we need people who are recreating, who are actually building the examples of that new system so that people can move into it. So when I think about the Resilience Hub's work and permaculture, it sits in that recreate, reimagine section over there. So the first time that I heard the word permaculture, I was in Ecuador. I worked for a study abroad program for a long time. This is why I've been in these different places. But I was in Ecuador with a group of students, and we were staying at a permaculture eco-lodge. I had no idea what that meant. It was the first time I'd heard the word. But the owner was giving us a tour of the property, and our first stop was this building. He said, this is the most important, if you remember nothing else, you have to see this building. This is the bathroom. And the owner explained with great disgust. He said, it's so disgusting. With normal toilets, we put human waste into clean water. He's like, what is more disgusting than putting human waste into clean water? And yet, that's the system that's been recognized as progress. And so he pushed back on that to say, basically that he had built this new, this system of a composting toilet. How many people have heard of composting toilets? So this was a composting toilet. Basically, you can see on the right, people go to the bathroom, they add sawdust that comes from the building actually that they had been doing with trees from the outsides. They add sawdust to it, it begins composting. That compost is then used to fertilize the plants that are growing in the bathroom itself. So the bathroom is basically a greenhouse. The compost sits for 2 years, don't worry. It's fully composted. But this composting toilet is actually also a greenhouse because it's on a south-facing slope, it has a glass wall, and it can grow plants right in that area.
It's a garden place.
It's a garden, it's both the bathroom and a garden place, exactly. And then you can see in that top photo on the right that there's a sink to wash hands, and the sink actually just directly runs into the garden bed, so it's irrigating the garden bed. And even down in that bottom right corner, you can see that the wall is made out of glass bottles. So there is no such thing as waste in this system. And actually, then the food that's in there you can either snack on, or it's also can be used to feed the chickens that are outside. So there is no such thing as waste in this system. And so after, we spent a lot of time learning about permaculture at this site, and then I wrote a blog post about this particular composting toilet. And my grandfather, who was a climate change denier, did not believe in the idea of climate change, wrote me an excited email back saying basically, like, I think this is the future. And he really was really excited because he felt like it was both really beautiful and really practical, that it just made more sense than putting human waste into clean water and polluting clean water going forward. So at that point, learning about permaculture in this way, it occurred to me basically that there's a possibility for things to both be more practical in solutions and also to be more beautiful. Like also for us to have the possibility of living an even better future. And I realized that for me, the idea of sustainability and some of the small-scale changes had always felt a little bit frustrating or depressing. Like, the most that we could do was to not screw it up for future generations. And what captured my imagination about the composting toilet and about the idea of permaculture, and I think also for my grandfather, was this possibility that maybe there's something more than not just messing it up for future generations. Not just not making it worse. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, it's about like the fully like composting toilet and sink and like the bathroom. I was just wondering how that could be like implemented in the like day-to-day life in like a city or like a more suburban area.
Yeah, totally. That's an awesome question, and actually there are a bunch of examples of that happening all around Maine, and I would be happy to maybe write down some ways that that's happening. There's both some more like industrial systems that people can buy, and there's also really simple systems that people have been putting in. Yeah, I'm getting to the way that the Resilience Hub works on that. Thank you for asking. So I had spent a lot of time thinking about the behaviors that are over here on the negative side. So the idea that humans are polluting, extracting, degrading, that we have these systems that are causing problems and that are not working and are really inherently unjust. And then I also had been learning about this idea that we could be sustaining, maintaining, preserving, conserving, and all of those things are super, super important. But what I became really interested in with basically like blocking harm, but what I became really interested in with permaculture was this idea that we could actually be a regenerative or reparative force. That we could actually be increasing fertility, not just trying to keep fertility from going away. So at that point I found the Resilience Hub, which is an organization in Portland that focuses on permaculture, as well as developing new economic models and thinking about new ways of getting food and distributing food. So I finally started to study what permaculture actually meant. And there are many definitions. Some of them are very long and very jargony. This is one from this guy Bill Mollison, who was in Australia. I think the key pieces to highlight are that it's the conscious design of productive ecosystems that have the diversity, stability, and resilience of natural ecosystems. And it's the harmonious integration of landscape and people. Another, maybe more succinct definition is that permaculture is a design method and a set of strategies for creating resilient human habitats and healthy ecosystems. So the word permaculture comes from combining permanent and agriculture, or even just permanent and culture. So what if we were to think about anything we were installing lasting for as many generations as possible? Just the way that forest ecosystem in Tikal, those things were planted or selected back thousands and thousands of years ago, but still they're productive for humans today. So permaculture basically is mimicking nature's patterns in order to redesign human systems. So it could be food growing, it could be homes, it could even be economies. Also, we know that this isn't anything new. This is something that people have been practicing for thousands and thousands of years. And in fact, a lot of societies that have been practicing this, because of the same forces that are doing the environmental degradation, have been facing a lot of injustice and colonization. So part of this is recognizing that this is actually an old way of doing things. A goal of permaculture is to build resilient systems. So a good definition of resilience is that ability to bounce back from a shock or a disturbance. And this is especially important when we're thinking about climate change, because we know that there's going to be, there are now and there will be increasing shocks to the system. So floods, natural disasters, drought, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to design human systems that have the ability to bounce back from those different disturbances. So when we're doing design work with a permaculture lens, these are some of the things we're thinking about. So that we're looking for the idea that things could be compostable, not just, the compost from our waste at the end of lunch, but really that even our homes or our cars could be compostable. There are actually people designing cars out of mushrooms right now, which is like mind-blowing. But so thinking creatively about what would it look to have a truly compostable civilization. The design shouldn't be reliant on finite resources, so it shouldn't be reliant on things like oil that will run out. It can continue indefinitely, and that they are systems that are fair, are just, and are equitable. So centering, not keeping the environment separate from humans, but centering social justice in this. So permaculture can apply to any of these things. It is about gardens, but it could also be a design system that looks at education and culture, or health, or economics, or building. So it sees all those things as interconnected. And basically we can apply the same principles of design to land use, to water, to energy, to shelter, to the way we think of our communities. So permaculture is rooted in it has a set of ethics, so how we do that work, and also a set of principles. So to think about the ethics, there's an ethic around earth care, so the immediate care of the landscape right around us, but also recognizing that earth care requires being an advocate at times, like it requires us to be an advocate for things that are happening in the rainforest, for example, because those things are connected. It has an ethic around people care, so that any landscape or any design that's happening actually needs to take care of the people in it, that those people aren't expendable or just a labor force. And we can't be so focused on the future that we actually forget to take care of our needs now. So we wouldn't want to just plant nut trees, which take 20 years to give a yield. We actually want to make sure that there are crops that people can eat in the short term. And we want the nut trees for the future. And then the last one is fair share. So we need to assess needs versus wants, and we need to challenge the ways in which wealth is distributed or land is distributed, And when there's a surplus, like if there's extra apples in an orchard, then permaculture asks that we design into the system ways that that surplus will be redistributed, either back to animals in the system or to people within the system. So then, in addition to the ethics, permaculture also has a set of design principles, which are basically thinking tools that allow us to build a design. And there are 12 of them, and really interesting to dive into, but I'm going to highlight just a couple of quick examples of a few principles. So one of the design principles is catch and store energy. So this is a building that is a passive solar house, so passive heating. And basically, obviously the sun shines at certain times of day, it brings a lot of energy in the form of heat. And by building this black stone wall, on the south side of the building, it can absorb heat, and then at night it actually releases the heat back into the building. So you don't actually need any external heat source because you captured the sun's energy. Another design principle is integrate rather than segregate. So, for example, you might have up in the top left corner, you might have a lot of slugs in your garden. So one approach to the slugs would either be to put a bunch of labor in to go and pick all the slugs off the plants, which would take a lot of time and a lot of energy. Another approach might be to use some sort of chemical to try to kill the slugs. But a permaculture approach would say that you don't actually have a slug problem, you have a duck deficit. And so bringing in ducks that eat slugs and then actually poop onto the plants and fertilize the plants. So you're actually turning problems into each other rather than separating them. A third principle is produce no waste. So if you think about a forest ecosystem, there's no such thing as waste in the forest. This is an example of a technique called sheet mulching, which is basically where you bring things that are considered waste products. So leaves that get swept up off of people's lawns and sent to the dump, grass clippings, seaweed that they have to scoop off of the beach. And you layer all those things, cardboard as well, we do a base layer of cardboard. You layer all those things on top of each other and they start breaking down and basically can build a whole new layer of topsoil, which also then functions to sequester carbon, to actually pull carbon down out of the atmosphere. And the last one that I was going to highlight is just this idea of creatively use and respond to change. So I think this is especially significant in thinking about climate change and how we design for the future, that we know things are going to be changing. So an example might be planting something like a food forest. So rather than planting all one crop, this is actually really similar to what Susie was talking about in terms of lobstering. Rather than planting all one crop that might or might not survive in climate change, we could actually plant a whole forest of perennial food that some years might do well, some other years might do poorly, but they'll keep balancing each other out so that we have the ability to grow food, anticipating change in the long term. I can keep going, but I think maybe I'll wrap up.
We'll just take a little bit of room for questions.
Yeah, that's fine.
Can we have a round of applause for thank you so much for that. I'm really excited every time I do these presentations, I learn something new too, so I'm excited to learn about the resilience you have. So, does anybody have any questions for anybody that's up on our panel about either permaculture or how to get involved? Maybe some of you are out there thinking about, having an interest in marine science or permaculture and how to get involved with that. This would be a really good time to ask about it. Yeah.
So, with the permaculture thing, all of the pictures you showed for how the system would work, it's all very based in rural areas and forests and stuff. How would you incorporate this into a big city? How would you do permaculture in New York?
Okay, great. So her question is, how could you integrate permaculture concepts into a city like New York City?
Yeah, that is an awesome question. So I think basically what I was going to get to in the second piece of this was about the way that we have been doing permablitzes, which are basically work parties, kind of like barn raisings, in urban sites in Portland. So we can do it basically like you get 40 people together to install a phase of a permaculture design in a day. And people break up into teams and they do different projects. And so that can be on big scale pieces of land, or it can be, we've done them in like tiny narrow alleyways, or on rooftops, or in abandoned lots. And we can do things where all of the plants are growing vertically rather than horizontally, or where we're catching rainwater on the roof and then bringing it down through a vertical garden. So it's a really, really good question, and there are some really awesome examples in New York City and also in San Francisco of people who are doing urban permaculture in really small spaces and actually just using that as kind of an increased way to be creative.
Yes.
It's just an interesting thing, and I work like nursery in some place like another nursery. There, I like the working plants. I put the kind of like I see plants there. Some plants some places good like so I use that place maybe somewhere.
This is what you used Long Island Nursery. Is that what you said? Oh, O'Donnell's Nursery, yeah.
I would like working
Yep.
because I see plants, and some plants like here, some plants like behind the water, there's some fish.
Oh, he's talking about like some, do you know what that concept called, where you have fish and plants growing together?
She's part of that, she's part of like farming. I do plants, some sort.
Do you have some knowledge on aquaculture? Does permaculture work with that?
Yeah, so we actually, there's a really cool example.
One more minute and then she'll answer this question, okay?
There's a really cool example of some people in Austin, Texas that have been doing like urban aquaculture in the system of bathtubs. Actually, that's really cool. So I haven't worked with it in Portland, but I know there are some people nearby and probably some people in this cool. Pairing the learning centers.
All right, well, I know that the time is wrapping up, so one more round of applause and thanks for your attention, everyone.